Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey, for the invitation to be here this afternoon, and I certainly have appreciated the support that Family Voice has given us over the years by making people aware of what's been happening, and we're very thankful for that. Whenever I get the opportunity to speak, I always wonder what people might be expecting to hear from this fellow who keeps getting himself put in jail. Well, this is what I would like to say to you this afternoon. I've got two short questions I'd like you to think about. The two questions are almost the same, except that the second one has just one extra word in it. For most people in this room, probably everybody in this room, the answer to the first question is probably quite clear in your minds. The question being, I hope I've got this right, is abortion wrong? Each of us has a story as to how it is that you have ended up being present today, and I'm sure to one degree or another your stories would touch upon this question about the rightness or wrongness of abortion, as I know this issue is one that Family Voice Australia takes very seriously. For my wife Liz and I, and as Jeff said, Liz will be arriving any minute, we had not paid much attention to the subject of abortion until one day about 27 years ago. A friend handed us a few leaflets and suggested we take a look at them. Little did we realise at that time what enormous consequences that small act was to have for our future. Perhaps you've seen these leaflets yourselves over the years. They were produced by the group Last Days Ministries, run by Keith and Melody Green. And I have to admit that when I first looked at the leaflets, they shocked me and repulsed me to the extent that, to my shame, I couldn't even finish reading them. My reaction was somewhat like the dog in Foot Rot's Flat. Now, sadly, you mightn't be able to read that too well, but what's going on there is that Wal is getting some foot rot off one of the sheep, I think it is, and the dog says, "What will be underneath when Wal cuts it back?" And he says, "Hold it," and raises off, runs inside, sits down in front of the TV, and he says, "I don't want to think about it." So I put the leaflets on a shelf and I tried to forget about them. But I couldn't. After some months, I became convicted that deliberately trying to remain ignorant was a very inadequate response, even a highly irresponsible one. If this subject was so awful that I didn't want to think about it, then maybe its very awfulness demanded that a thorough examination of what was going on was needed. So with considerable trepidation, I managed to force myself to take the leaflets down and think about the matter more closely. Well, that was back in 1986, and it was just around that time that Liz became pregnant with our first child. So all of this became particularly pertinent for us. We were at that time students at a Bible college here in Brisbane, not this particular one, but here in Brisbane, and we were preparing to work in Japan with a Christian mission. But given the impact that these leaflets had had on us, we decided we needed to make some response to them. We had been ignorant of what was going on, so we assumed that perhaps others didn't know what was happening also, and that all that was needed was for people to be informed, and then things would change. So we imported these leaflets and distributed them through the churches in Queensland. Maybe if you can think back all that way, you might have even got them at your church. I hope you did. While the 15 to 20,000 leaflets that we sent out didn't appear to ignite the fire of concern about abortion that we had hoped for, we told ourselves that we had at least tried to do something before heading overseas. Well, as it happened, a few months prior to our departure, it was decided by the mission that both Liz and I had health problems, which would prevent us from being able to work in Japan. Interestingly, we went on to have 7 children, and all 9 of us have hardly had more than a few days ill health between us, for which we are very thankful. By this time, we had become quite involved with the pro-life movement, and when going to Japan did not work out, we were invited to become the Queensland coordinators for Right to Life Australia. So returning to that first question, is abortion wrong? I'm going to largely assume that since you have chosen to be here today, you probably don't need any convincing that abortion is wrong. We live at a time when, by means of photography, ultrasound technology, etc., we have unprecedented opportunity to see clearly the humanity of the child in the womb. More particularly, for us as Christians, we have the testimony of the Scriptures that God has uniquely created all human beings in His own image. The words of Psalm 139 are familiar to us. Here the psalmist exalts in God's awareness of and involvement in every aspect of life, and in every aspect of his and by extension our lives. And that includes the time we spent in our mother's wombs. There is no hint here that each human life before birth is just a meaningless blob of protoplasm. Far from it, the passage clearly indicates that there is a seamless continuity between our life before and after birth. Of more significance still are the remarkable implications of the incarnation of Jesus. In Luke 1, we read of the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary and telling her that she will give birth to a son to be named Jesus, who will be called the Son of the Most High. In verse 35, we read that the angel said, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you." This miraculous virginal conception is set forth as the start of what was to be a normal human life, a life common to the rest of humanity, which Jesus was to experience. The fact that Jesus, the Son of the Most High, living in his mother's womb, gives validation to the importance of all human lives during their own time in the womb. In view of such scriptural passages, it has been the position of the Christian Church that the life of the child before birth should be respected and not be subject to willful destruction. So in our role as coordinators of Right to Life Australia, we began to try to educate our community about the absolute value of life in the womb by speaking up on behalf of the little ones. We held walks, life chains, rallies, seminars, and lobbied politicians and the media, everything we could think of. Then one day in 1993, someone asked me if I had seen a fairly recently published book from America called Shattering the Darkness. Once again, little did we realise, but this was to prove as significant a turning point in our lives as had the receiving of the Last Days Ministry leaflets. By this time I had read quite a lot of pro-life literature, and I expected this book to be pretty much more of the same, but it wasn't. And just as I couldn't initially read the Last Days Ministries leaflets, I couldn't read this book either. Perhaps I should have looked at the one review of the book that there is on Amazon.com before I opened the cover. That review commences, "I give you fair warning, don't read this book if you are not willing to be heart-wrenchingly challenged." At this point, and I've got copies of it over there, at this point I am tempted to think that the best use of the time today would be to simply read aloud extracts from the book. Its message is, I believe, that important. However, with the hope that, despite, or perhaps because of, the Amazon reviewer's warning, you will get a copy yourself and read it. The author of the book is Joseph Foreman, and like a number of other very important books, the book was largely written from prison. And this brings me to the second question that I would like you to think about today. As I said, it is almost the same as the first one, is abortion wrong? Except that there is one extra word in the second question. We probably don't have too much problem with that first question. It's not hard to see that abortion takes the life of a human being, and we know that killing is wrong. Abortion is not something that we would do, or if we have had an abortion, we are hopefully repentant of that. Neither would we recommend anyone else to have an abortion. The second question, though, is not so easy to answer. It is not so much about what other people may do, but rather it relates to our behaviour. The question is allowing abortion wrong? It is a fact, as we all know, that here in Brisbane and other cities around Australia, there are certain places that have been set up for the specific purpose of ending the lives of young children. For some decades now, these places have operated openly, boldly advertising their services. Pregnancy termination services is the grisly heading that has been used in the Yellow Pages. We know where these places are, we know when they're open, and we know exactly what they do there. Perhaps 2 million young lives, 2 million young lives have been deliberately taken in these places and in our hospitals over the last 30 to 40 years. So the question for us, we who believe and state that every abortion takes the life of a child of equal value to any other human being, is allowing abortion to take place at these centres wrong? Now, of course, I'm sure that many of us here today have done and are doing things to oppose abortion, and so it cannot be said that we have been passively standing by while the killing takes place. And yet, if it were to be the case that centres were to open this week, where 20 toddlers were openly taken each day to have their lives ended, would our response be any different to that compared to what is happening now? I think certainly it would be. And not just us, but virtually the whole community would be there to rescue those children, making sure that not even one more child was killed in those places. When it comes to the abortion clinics, however, these places go on without any direct hindrance to their deadly practices. It seems hard to deny that there is something of an inconsistency between our professed beliefs about the status of the children being killed by abortion and our actual actions. Are we prepared to treat preborn children as equals, not just in theory, but as equals in real life? The primary theme of the book, Shattering the Darkness, is that Christians are to lay down their lives for others, and this must include the children who are about to be aborted, just as Christ laid down his life for us. Foreman calls Christians to take with utmost seriousness what Jesus has done for us by sacrificially coming into the world to rescue us. He then challenges us to take Jesus' intervention as the example for our coming to the rescue of children condemned to abortion. I would like to read now a few paragraphs from the introduction to the book, and I'll tell you when the quote is finished. The heart of authentic Christianity is rescue, not the act of sitting in at abortion clinics, not a complex systematic theology, but the heart of utter abandonment to God on behalf of others, regardless of risk and price. When we learn to die to self, then giving ourselves to rescue others will seem quite normal, neither heroic, nor radical, nor wrong. If reading this book does not get you arrested, that is fine, if only you understand the way of the cross for what God has called you to do. When you finish this book, my goal is not that you get arrested, but that you never again fear what men do to you. I want you to set your affairs in order so that when it comes to obeying God, you do not make lawsuits, tax exemptions, going to jail, losing your job, popularity, or success your major considerations. This will take time. What are the first steps? Begin with those areas where you can die to yourself in order to transform the part of the world God has entrusted to you. Most of us are not ready to die to ourselves to protect children from abortion because we have not died to ourselves in the mundane areas of dishwashing, careers, report writing, being Christian businessmen, etc. Begin here, but do not stop here. Continue to risk as you reach out to others. I believe the days of 10,000-person rescues are still ahead. I believe we will see huge crowds of Christians descend on freestanding clinics and each take a brick home with them. I know for a fact that the abortionists expect this of us, but it will require a tremendous spiritual transformation in each of us for this not only to be a possible, but a positive step. This transformation in the church will come as a result of enough Christians trading their lives for others, thereby purchasing the right to speak to our society. The power to serve is the power to rule. In all arenas of life, we have strayed so far from our heritage of sacrificial obedience to God that peacefully stopping a baby murderer seems extreme. Because we do not rescue in other areas of life, rescue at an abortion clinic seems pushy. A rescue is when one or more people use their passive yet physical presence to prevent others from killing children at an abortion clinic. Usually this involves kneeling in front of the door so that no one can get in. The common thread in all rescues is that child killing is made impossible by Christians who are physically but harmlessly preventing it, standing in solidarity with the unborn." End of quote. These words, and remember this is just the introduction, spoke very profoundly to me. And when I did manage to finish the book, I passed it on to Liz and then to another pro-life couple, Jim Dowling and Anne Ramper, who are good friends of ours. They also were greatly challenged, and so by the end of 1993, after prayer and discussion, we were ready to engage in our first non-violent direct action sit-in. That's Anne Ramper there at the Greenslopes Abortion Clinic. Our first one wasn't there though, it was at the Planned Parenthood Clinic at Bowen Hills. But cutting a long story short, after a couple of days of sit-ins, we quickly found ourselves in court, facing the prospect of a Supreme Court injunction to keep us away. Much to our surprise though, the judge granted our request to be given access to the clinic's records, minus all personal details, but giving the grounds for why the abortions were being done. At that, the clinic immediately withdrew their action against us, effectively acknowledging that they operate illegally, which they do. But despite this outcome, for a number of reasons, we lost our nerve, and the book went back on the shelf and sat there for about 8 years. During that time, I went back to university, the University of Queensland, and did a degree part-time in philosophy, majoring in ethics. I did so in order to see if my thinking on these matters could stand up to the scrutiny of a secular tertiary course. Needless to say, there were some interesting tutorials. At the end of all that, in 2001, I decided I had done enough thinking and enough talking, and it was time to be more active again. Our small group reread the book, and this renewed our convictions. This time we decided to be more organised, with the hope that we would not quickly fold up as we had done previously. We set out in writing what we were planning to do, and we sent a copy of that, plus a copy of Shattering the Darkness, to about 25-30 Christian people whom we respected, in order to hear what they may have to say about our plans. Well, we're still waiting to hear from 28 of them. Nevertheless, we were undeterred and pressed ahead, forming a very simple organisation called Protect Life. Then with a couple of others, 4 of us commenced regular sit-ins at the 4 abortion clinics in Brisbane. We had no idea how things would work out, but we believed that we simply needed to act according to our convictions and to take things as they came. As it turned out, it seemed that for quite a while the police did not know how to respond to us either. But after some time we began to generate a string of court appearances, and as it became evident that we were simply not going to stop, things began to get tougher. A curious incident occurred the first time a couple of us found ourselves in a cell for a few hours at the City Watch House following an arrest. The very first person we shared the cell with asked us if we knew who he was. He was a young fellow. We said no, and he then proceeded to inform us in all seriousness that he was Jesus Christ. What do you say in reply to that? Somewhat to my surprise, it took a year before I found myself in jail for an extended period at Arthur Gorrie. Again, I met another interesting person on my first day inside. This time he was a lawyer, also on his first day of imprisonment. but he was in for a lengthy sentence for fraud. We became friends, and even though he had not thought much about abortion before, he was keen to give us legal advice. At my next court appearance, I took that advice, and for the first time after 14 convictions, we were successful in court. However, it was only a technical victory and not a win against the taking of human life as such. The police then began to charge us with a different offence, that of trespass, and this has resulted in a number of further periods inside since then, including, as Jeff mentioned, for about 8 months last year. Usually when people find out that we carry out direct action sit-ins at the abortion clinics involving the risk of arrest and going to jail, they have many questions, if not objections, as Jeff mentioned before. We can fully understand that, and hopefully we have enough time to at least address some of those questions and concerns this afternoon. I would draw your attention to that as well as Shattering the Darkness. We would also highly recommend this book by Randy Alcorn, Is Rescuing Right? In this book, a very different style of book to Shattering the Darkness, but it's a very different style of book, but a very good complement to Shattering the Darkness. My wife making a grand entrance here. Randy Alcorn thoroughly looks into the concerns that have been raised about taking direct action at the abortion clinics. Then there is also this useful booklet by John Kavanagh O'Keefe called No Cheap Solutions. And finally, I would mention that there are quite a few articles on the Protect Life website, and that I have over there as individual copies, but we also have combined them together into a booklet if you would like to have them. Some people are very concerned by the fact that our actions bring us into conflict with the law. Certainly we agree that Christians should normally abide by the law of the land, as the Apostle Paul taught in Romans 13. But it's not hard to see that it cannot be the case that Christians must invariably abide by the law. For example, if it were made illegal for Christians to talk to their children, or indeed to anybody else about their faith, we would not be acting wrongly by disobeying such a law. Rather, it would be wrong for us to obey it. Martin Luther King Jr. made this point in his letter from Birmingham jail. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Does coming to the aid of innocent human beings who are about to be killed, even though such aid may be deemed to be in defiance of the law, constitute an exception to the general principle of obedience to the law? We believe so. And there are a number of instances in the Bible that establish precedent for taking such action. Randy Alcorn examines this in detail in Is Rescuing Right? Moreover, who would say that people like Corrie ten Boom and her family acted wrongly when they disobeyed the law to rescue Jews during World War II? Even if it is agreed that it is not wrong to come to the aid of those who are about to be unjustly killed, many still wonder if there are not better and perhaps less difficult or demanding ways to try and save young lives than engaging in acts that conflict with the law. Surely all we need to do is change the law to make abortion illegal. Again, I would like to read a few sentences from Shattering the Darkness. Most assume that the only truly effective intervention is legal intervention. We must make it illegal to have an abortion. Only the law can forcibly intervene. But the law is impotent if it is not rooted in the intolerance of a community committed to seeing it enforced. We need more than a change in the law. We need a change of heart. Hearts no longer afraid to spend and be spent for the kingdom of God. Only changed hearts will do what it takes to shatter the darkness, because only transformed hearts are willing to die. We will never transform our culture by politicking for a surface change in the law. Change will only come from the example of Christians who are not afraid to live what they believe. But all too easily, the world proves that we are not willing to lay down our lives for others. We are only willing to lay down our laws. The solution to legalise murder must go deeper than a mere law against it." End of quote. These are very challenging words. Much time and effort has been and continues to be put in by pro-lifers to try and achieve a political solution to the horror of abortion. But I would agree with Foreman that something much deeper than a change in the law has to happen before there will be a change in the practice of abortion. The wholesale destruction of innocent human life by abortion is arguably the greatest social evil in history. We may hope that this can be overcome at relatively low cost to ourselves through political means, but as the title of Kavanagh O'Keeffe's booklet says, when it comes to abortion, there are no cheap solutions. We need to sacrificially lay down our lives for our youngest neighbours, and by doing so bear testimony to the inestimable worth of their lives. Well then, we may think, what about education? If we educate people about the humanity of the preborn child and the devastating impact that abortion has on the child, the mother and everyone else, then we will make society see that abortion is wrong and people will decide not to have an abortion. Kavanagh O'Keeffe makes this telling observation in response. Obviously, education is absolutely necessary, but there is often a tremendous gap between what a teacher intends to teach and what a student actually learns. On the one hand, and I've changed these figures to represent Australia rather than America, on the one hand, there are pro-life people saying that in Australia this year, 100,000 children are being killed, that we are in the middle of the greatest war in the history of mankind, that worldwide 1 person in 3 is being killed. Pro-abortionists, on the other hand, are working hard to convince Australians that abortion is simply not all that exciting. Abortion is a fact of life and we should all relax about it. The catastrophe is that a growing number of students are combining the thoughts of pro-lifers and pro-abortionists in a way that the teachers can barely imagine. They agree that life begins at conception and that we are engaged in a Holocaust, but also agree that it is not any big deal. The coming generation has learned that mayhem and murder, even a Holocaust, are acceptable. This is not seriously challenged by the visible actions of pro-life educators. Actions speak louder than words, and inaction is pretty eloquent. The message that we intend is that the global situation is horrifying, but our body language gives a more mellow message. Regardless of our intent, the lesson that is learned is that a Holocaust is not much more serious than a proposed construction of a highway across a popular park, or the decision to locate a dump near an affluent suburb. Our actions are similar to those of enraged citizens threatened with a loss of property value. The failure to re-examine what pro-life education actually does is terribly dangerous. The work must go on, but must be supplemented by action. End of quote. Yes, educating people is essential, but unless there is commensurate action along with the education, we end up sending a dangerously wrong message. We must do more than make people aware that unborn babies are human. If we are going to say that they are equal to us, we must live like that is true. And living like that is true means actually laying down our lives for them, not just talking about it. But we immediately recognise that to go down that path of laying down our lives for the unborn by intervening to try and save their lives is costly, perhaps too costly even to contemplate. Joseph Foreman responds, do we accuse the abortionists of worshipping the god of money? Then we accuse ourselves. To the extent that we draw back from protecting children for fear of losing the favour of the money god if we get fined or sued. Do we accuse the women who seek abortion of sacrificing their infants to the gods of career, family, name, respectability, nice things, or mere convenience? Then we only accuse ourselves when we refuse to risk our careers, family, peace, respectability, nice things, and convenience to save these children. To the extent that we draw back to protect any part of our own lifestyle instead of protecting the children, we purchase that part of our life by infant sacrifice. This will seem hard and judgmental only if we do not take into account that the same God who commanded these women and their doctors, saying, "You shall not murder," has commanded us to be our brother's keepers, to love our neighbours as ourselves, to defend the fatherless, to rescue the innocent, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. In a word, to have the mind of Christ. End of quote. To try and rescue the unborn is undoubtedly very costly. But Jesus made it clear that it is costly to follow him, whatever it is that we are called to do. Each and every one of us has to take up our cross and follow him if we are to be his disciple. There is no other option given to any of us. This is not an easy talk to give. Abortion is an unpleasant, challenging subject, to say the least. And as you have probably found in your own lives, any mention of it often quickly arouses high emotion. It is something we may prefer not to think about. But that helps nobody. I would love to be able to finish with a neat, clear ending, but I don't know if that is possible. These last 11 years have been a challenge for my family and myself, and if anything, the future would present an even greater challenge. We are very conscious that we and those acting with us cannot continue without the involvement and in support of the wider church. We would encourage everybody here today to consider before God what part you may be able to play in helping rescue the most vulnerable and defenceless members of the human family. Finally, in conclusion, one last short quote from Shattering the Darkness. I do not believe that we will see an end to child killing until enough people do for the children what Christ did for us. Make it a personal matter of life and death to protect them. There will be no lasting solution at law, in alternatives, nor education, until enough people treat the preborn as their human equals. When we begin to treat them as truly equal to ourselves, we will find that there is a tremendous price to be paid. Only by paying that price will we purchase the necessary respect for the preborn to have their inalienable right to life respected by the rest of the world. I'll just hand it over now to Liz to say a few words before we give opportunity for questions and comments.
Well, thank you very much for the chance to be here. We think it's very important that I make an appearance because obviously this is a very challenging road that we've gone down, and we want to make very clear to people who hear our story that it is actually our story, and it's not something that is Graham's decision to go down this in this way, because obviously it has large repercussions for the rest of the family. So I think Graham might have mentioned we have 7 children. There's always lots of other things going on in our lives, as well as our main interest and concern about making some response to the abortion issue. When we first got married, we actually, very interesting coming to this room, Hudson Taylor room, because we were very interested in going overseas as missionaries. And in fact, we almost got there, but we weren't considered to be, I think Graham mentioned that, well enough. Anyway, but that was our heart's desire at that time, and it has continued throughout our marriage, that we want to do and go and be wherever and whoever that God calls us to be. So it has been a joint decision and a joint journey that we've travelled on, even though at times Graham's been in jail and I've been holding the fort. But the other reason also that I haven't been involved in the direct action itself, risking arrest with both of us away would be a very good idea with children, is because I'm also involved with the pregnancy support organisation, the Crisis Life Centre. And some of you may be aware of that organisation. And our response in that setting is very different to Graham's response, but nonetheless a very important part of the pro-life response to abortion, trying to have opportunity to talk to women and men before they make their decision, provide practical assistance should they continue and with their pregnancy and want assistance, and also to provide support after abortion if women and men have found that their choice has become something that they really need to sort through. So in that way, I'm still very busy on the pro-life front, but in a different context. So just thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and it has been a very important time for Graham to be able to speak in a number of venues with a bit of our story and the challenge that it is, and it is an ongoing challenge, and I'm just as challenged. Thank you.